Hello, everyone. My name is Peter, and you are listening to the inaugural episode of my new podcast, My Best Life. Thanks for listening. The premise of this show is quite simple. My intention is to ask the question, what does it mean to live your best life? This is a phrase that I've been hearing more and more of in the last few years. Yeah, just hearing different people talking about wanting to live their best lives, and it just made me wonder, well, what does that mean? What does that look like exactly? Something that has resonated with me on a deep level, and part of what I do each day when I wake up in the morning is, well, I try to do a meditation and to set an intention for each day. And my intention is always the same. My intention for each day is exactly that, to live my best life, to be the best version of myself in each and every moment. But it gets me to wondering, well, okay, what is that? What does that imply exactly? Because there are days when there are big moments in our lives where we're called to bring out the best of ourselves. And perhaps we meet the moment, or perhaps we don't. But there are also many other, times in our lives, smaller moments, seemingly insignificant moments, or insignificant days in the grand scheme of things. And I wonder, well, how do we live our best lives when it's laundry day or house cleaning day or, doing some of the more mundane tasks that all of us have to do in our day-to-day lives? My sense is that, when we ask this question, it implies looking at both our relationship with ourself as well as with our relationship with others. And that's something that I hope to get into with future guests on the show. We have a limited amount of time in this life, and what I'd like to get at is, well, how do we make the best use of that time? Does it even matter? Some people would say yes, and others might disagree. My own view tends to be that every moment of our lives carries deep significance. And I would even go so far as saying that our thoughts, words, and actions reverberate throughout the universe, and they matter more than we realize. And that includes the big things as well as the smaller things. So I hope to speak to a variety of guests from different walks of life. Some of my own personal interests include yoga, and so I'll be talking to a number of yogis, I hope, including in this first episode. But I'm also hoping to talk to people, everyday people, doctors, teachers, nurses, and all sorts of different people to get their perspective on how they find meaning and purpose in their day-to-day lives. And my hope is that this podcast will serve as an inspiration both for myself and for others. So, there you have it. That's a little bit about the show. And if you've listened this far, thank you very much. And I will now introduce my first guest. And my first guest is a very, very special human being. I did mention that I've been on a yogic path for the last, 7 or 8 years or so. And when I say yoga, I mean it in the truest sense of the word, because here in the West we tend to have, I would say, a fairly limited view of what yoga is. Most people would see it as some sort of physical practice, and that is part of it, certainly. But if you actually study some of the ancient yogic texts, you will see that the practice itself is a much deeper, much deeper practice. In fact, it is classically described as an eight-limbed practice, and asana, or the physical practice, as we know it in the West, is but one of eight different limbs. So there's a lot more to it, to sum that up. And so anyhow, on my journey of the last several years, I have had the good fortune to interact with some wonderful and inspiring people. And my first guest today is one of those people. Devdas Sahaja is a yogi. He has been a yogi for 2 or 3 decades. He is also one of my teachers in the last few years, and as I said, just a very special human being. So in this episode, we talk about his yogic journey, how that all began many years ago, how he was inspired by the work of a well-known yogi by the name of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was one of the initial people who came from India in the last century, bringing yoga to the West. So we talk about some of Devdas's early experiences, including going to India and meeting his teacher. And we talk about, a lot of really interesting yogic-related themes, including pranayama as well, which is another fascinating subject for me personally. Generally understood in the modern world or translated as breath work or yogic breath work, which has become its own phenomenon in the last few years. But yeah, this has been a thing that yogis have been doing for thousands of years, literally. And in my own journey, Devdas has been really inspirational in terms of some of the things that I've learned from him and the practices that I've undergone with him. So yeah, we touch upon all of those themes and more. And, when it comes to living one's best life, I think Devdas is a wonderful inspiration for all of us. Certainly he has been for me. So I hope you enjoy this first episode, and I hope that you stick around for more. Thanks for listening. Devdas Sahaja, welcome to My Best Life.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Peter. It's a joy.
Well, it's a wonderful experience for me to be chatting with you. You are officially our first guest on the podcast, and so thank you for agreeing to speak with me. It means so much. I wanted to start with a quote. As I was driving home from work today, I was listening to another podcast. It was a podcast on Taoism, and it was really interesting, actually. And this particular episode was talking, I forget the exact title of the episode, I'll have to look that up, but was talking about achieving one's goals through small steps.
Okay.
And the famous quote from Lao Tzu was mentioned, which many people are familiar with. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yes.
Now, I know that you have been a yogi, a practitioner of yoga for, 2 decades, 3 decades, more?
Yeah, probably somewhere between 2 and 3.
Somewhere between 2 and 3. So what were your first steps like on that journey? Can you recall back to that time, and what was it that attracted you to the yogic path?
Great question. it really is sort of like rolling back into the fossil record almost. But but if I think back, actually, I started kind of hatha yoga when I was in high school, and
Oh,
that
wow.
was just sort of good fortune, you could say. They had a program at my high school where sort of talented people in the community could come and offer afternoon activities. And there was a very serious yogi, highly qualified from India. And he was kind of my first hatha yoga teacher. And looking back, even that was just such good fortune. I mean, I had a highly, highly, highly qualified, very beautiful teacher. I really trusted him and enjoyed his presence and his company and his insights, and even sometimes would seek him out and say, hey, this is going on in my life. What do you think? I didn't really kind of realize in a weird way what a treasure I had. And then when I was in college, I started meditation also, and then I found the book Autobiography of a Yogi. And
Right.
that book really propelled things strongly forward in many different ways. I kind of remember reading it and feeling like, it presents the kind of a yogic life and all of the different beings that are part of that life. And some of them seem to have kind of extraordinary abilities. And I remember just feeling like these are all my old friends.
Hmm. Interesting.
Like I can't like put it into words, but it just felt like I like everyone who's in this book, I know them. And then something of my story. Then I had the privilege of actually going and living in India and
Right.
mostly running meditation centers and yoga centers for 12 years. And that was a huge blessing. And along that pathway, I met my own teacher, and he actually was kind of not directly in that lineage, but he was in the same family tree, let's say.
Okay. So speak to me, if you will, about that book, because it's an important book. It's a book that many people are familiar with. I've read it myself a few years ago, and I've heard this story that when the late tech entrepreneur Steve Jobs, when he passed
Right,
away, he actually gave orders that this book be distributed to everyone that attended his funeral, because the book had inspired him so much. And I think the story goes, he read it when he was quite young, and I think he may
right.
have even reread it several times. And it's the story of Paramahansa Yogananda. And well, what can you tell us about that particular individual and the impact that he's had on yoga in the West?
Wow, it's a very interesting question. So, if you look at kind of like the older history of yoga, the first real yogi to land in the West, specifically in America, was actually Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda was a student of the great Saint Ramakrishna, and he gave this absolutely stunning talk. In fact, I think the history of that talk is quite interesting and quite funny in itself. He stood up and he said, "Brothers and sisters of America." And everybody got onto their feet and he got a standing ovation, and he'd only said one sentence.
Wow. And
But
that was at the Parliament of Religion
yeah,
or
the
something like that.
World
Wh-
Parliament of Religions. And then, but he didn't stay in the United States. He just came and he visited and he went back to India and he lived most
Right.
of his life in India. Whereas Yogananda actually came to America and stayed in America and spent most of his life in America. He did briefly go back to India for his own teacher's Mahasamadhi, his own teacher's passing from the body. But most of his life was spent in the West teaching Westerners. And that was extraordinary dharma. Actually, I feel like when I first discovered this is also kind of a funny joke in the sense of that it shows something of my age. But when I first discovered yoga, I was at a sort of Christmas party, fairly fairly well-to-do, fairly intelligent folks. And I walked around at that party and I asked, have you heard of yoga? Have you heard of meditation, to every single person there? And basically, quite a few people had heard of yoga before, actually. I think that was not that uncommon. It was maybe like 60% of the people. But meditation and pranayama, almost nobody. Like meditation, maybe 30%, pranayama, maybe 10. Or less than 10, actually, now that I think about it. I think there was one woman in the whole party that had heard of pranayama before.
And this was where
And
exactly?
in California,
California.
probably, yeah, probably when I was like, now that would be about 35, 34, 35 years back. And if you think about that now, like my friend is a teacher in California and she was helping the students make drawings of the houses. And she said every single child had a yoga or meditation room in their house.
Oh, wow.
You know, it's just now like, like common common knowledge, or
Right. It's
at
much
least
more
people have heard
accepted.
about it. Yeah, at least people have heard about it. At least people know about it. And even sometimes, even on the meditation side, even on the energy work side, I feel like it's much more common now that people have at least some information about it.
So, what do you think has changed? Because, as you've just alluded to, 20, 30, 40 years ago, there were not quite as many people who were interested in these subjects. And I mean, these days you'll find a yoga studio, well, maybe not on every corner, but there's
But
certainly much
almost.
more. Yeah, almost in certain parts of the world. I mean,
Yeah,
you're out in Bali, in Indonesia, and there I think you probably would find a yoga
definitely.
studio on every corner.
Def-
So what has changed? What has shifted? Why are people seeking this path at this time? What do you think?
I mean, I do feel like part of it is beings like Yogananda who really came and, sort of paved the way. What he said his mission was, which is interesting, is that he said his mission was bringing the best of the East and the best of the West into collaboration. And if you sort of think about the history of that, it's like that was kind of like he left the body in 1952. So in 1952, was that like a common thought pattern, or a common idea? I would say no. Like now we have the internet, we can reach around the world all the time. The kind of concept that we take the best of the East and the best of the West is, I think, a lot more present than it was at that time. And, in addition, it's like the kind of more unfortunate side of things is that we really have created a very unsustainable world system. And that's unsustainable on every single level. It's unsustainable on the sort of ecological level. It's unsustainable even on the human physiological level. It's like people are sick in proportion that's really never been present on this planet in quite this way. And so, if you're sort of living in a world that's quite out of balance, and you have a several thousand-year-old system that's designed to recalibrate and harmonize and balance your inner system, like, of course, that would be wildly popular. The kind of unfortunate side of that thing is much of the way that yoga is being taught now would not give you the fullness of the experience that I was just talking about, really recalibrating your system, really come back into sustainable inner alignment. Is it a possibility in yoga? Of course it is. It's not just a possibility, it's kind of an inevitability if you practice correctly. But there's a lot of different branches in the yoga system, and not all of them are equal, let's say.
Okay, well, let's explore that a little bit because that's a very interesting, very insightful comment. I have observed the same in my much briefer yogic journey. I think I've been on this path for about 7 or 8 years, so not quite as long as you have, but nevertheless, it's been an incredibly profound experience for me. I wish I had started 20 or 30 years earlier. But yeah, so all that to say, I've had some experiences working with yourself in particular, and I will disclose to our listeners that you are one of my teachers in those last 8 years, and I truly, truly value all that I learned from you and from other teachers. But I've also noticed, parts of the yoga world that maybe seem a bit more superficial.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, even here in Bali, where I feel like we're quite blessed with a fairly vibrant yoga world, within that world, there's lots of different variation, and I think a lot of the depth of the tradition has not been fully represented well. And, in a weird way, this is kind of a strange story, but it just happened a few weeks ago. So a few weeks ago, my wife, Kirsten, and myself they had a sort of grand opening of this spa, and you could get a free day pass for a cold plunge and, sauna and all these things. So we thought, okay, well, let's go. So we went, and inside of that was a gym also. And inside of the gym was one of the big Bali kind of yoga influencers. And he was like pushing like extremely heavy weights and kind of had this look of despair on his face. Like, and I just looked at him and it's like, wow, you know, the sad thing is, like, when I thought about it, I felt, I bet that's his job security.
Sure.
It's like he needs to look, you know, like he stepped out of the gym when
Right.
when he goes and delivers a class, or you know does his Instagram or does whatever else that he's doing. But then it's like, it's not 100% to say that that would mean that you weren't caring for the energetic side. But the energetic side of yoga is so powerful and so beautiful and so tremendously underrated. And definitely when you refine that system more, you would not be interested in going to the gym in that way, which sounds like kind of an extreme thing to say, except we can go back to Yogananda here and say Yogananda had a very advanced student whose name was Rajasi. He was a very beautiful, amazing yogi. And he wouldn't let Rajasi carry his suitcase to his room when he would come to visit the ashram. And someone was like, what? Like, why? And he was like, a soul like Rajarsi with that kind of command of his inner energetic shouldn't be lifting heavy things.
Interesting.
And it's like, I mean, that's definitely not what we're normally thinking in our world. And of course, that's relative and also probably specific to that particular being. But if you kind of think about it in a weird way, it makes a lot of sense. Like, if you're working with the subtle, you come out of working with gross at least a little bit. It doesn't, and gross means more material. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the
Right.
body. The
Right.
body is a huge gift, but you come out of body awareness. In fact, one of the great modern yogis, one of the things that he really recommends to people is wear loose clothing. Like, why would you wear loose clothing? Because your actual body, your actual energy body, your actual body of prana and the other more subtle bodies, are much, much, much larger than the physical body. If you cramp the physical body enough, you cramp the energetic body also. And, then it cannot express and interact with life. This is kind of one of the places you eventually land in the yoga world, is that the idea that we're isolated beings is just completely laughable. It's like the air and the sun and all of the elements and everything else is profoundly interacting with our system, not to mention planetary influence and, all kinds of interaction is happening. And that's good. Like it's the profound life force and the system of life is moving as us and through us.
Mm.
And, when you become really aware of that, it's like, what a tremendous gift. You're part of the tremendous intelligence and flow of life and life force. And this concept of you being a completely isolated being and, it's just like sort of an impossibility, because you recognize that on every level, from the sort of most material to the most subtle, everything's interacting with everything.
Hmm. Wow, that's you're giving me a lot to think about and chew on, and we can go so many different directions with this conversation. But before I dive deeper into that, I wanted to take a step back because we'd started talking about your own personal journey, and you had mentioned something that I was already aware of, that you had spent some time in India, and I wanted just to talk about that experience a little bit more, the experience of going there and meeting your teacher. And can you talk a little bit about your time in India?
Of course, yeah. I mean, India is just, you can say it's quite an unforgettable place. It can be, depends a lot on the person. For some people, it can be a very challenging place.
Yeah, I
Um,
experienced that for sure.
yeah, yeah. But also, I feel like in a weird way, when you become serious about your spiritual life, you also become serious about facing whatever challenges are there with joy and equanimity. And like the great science of yoga emerged from India. And it's just such a tremendous blessing to be there. I was once on a podcast actually with a scholar, like university professor, and he said something quite funny and quite interesting. He said to me, "Would you have had to go to India to achieve what you achieved?" And I said two things to him. He had started the conversation by saying, "I'm a complete disbeliever in yoga. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in any of the spiritual things." And I said, "Well, that's just not true, actually. It's not true that you're a disbeliever, because if you say I achieved something, I never told you I achieved something. So that means that you recognize something that happened here. But aside from that, it would not be a requirement that you live in India, but it does provide a certain soil that would allow things to grow in a little bit of a different way." And definitely my own teacher, I mean, my feeling about my teacher is to have spent one day, even one day with him, was so far past what I ever could have asked for from life. It's just ridiculous. And he said to me one time I was sitting there and he was talking about the West and, having a true teacher. And then he said to me, "Oh, there are realized beings in the West." And then he paused for a minute and he said, "But they have to hide." And it was like, whoa, I think that's true.
Hmm.
Like, and one of the great blessings of him was that he didn't have to hide. He just could offer what he was offering. And if anybody's particularly interested in that topic, there is a whole book about that, and it's available for free on our website, and it's available on Amazon. It's called Excerpts from Infinity, and it's all of the conversations that I had with my teacher. Actually, when I first came to my teacher, I think it was the very first day that I was there, he said, "I want you to write down all the stories that we talk about." And I said to him, "Oh, I'm definitely not the right person for that job. Like sometimes my memory's good, sometimes it's not that great. Like I don't always remember every detail of every conversation." And he sort of stopped and he looked at me and he said, "I'll help you remember."
Interesting.
And then I just said, "Okay, if you'll help me remember, I will write down every story." And I wrote down every story. And at some point I had this quite large stack of journals of all the times that I'd been to visit him and all the stories that he'd told. And then eventually I took that and wrote it all down. And I was very blessed, actually, and very lucky. Like I brought the manuscript back to him about a year before he left the body. And he was able to read through it himself and give comment and feedback. And he read the whole thing. And then he handed me back this tiny little slip of paper. And this tiny little slip of paper had all of his corrections on it. And what was so funny about it was that they were all factual. Like it was nothing spiritual was corrected at all. It was all like, you said that this person's name was this, but it's actually this. You said the name of this city was this, but it's actually this, And it was sort of 5, 6 things that he corrected from the manuscript. But I mean, it's written in the scripture of India, even one moment in the company of a realized being can be your raft over the ocean of delusion.
Hmm.
And definitely that aligned with my experience. It,
So there's an expression in Zen Buddhism which comes to mind, and I'm sure you've heard this before. When the student is ready, the master appears.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how did that first meeting with your teacher come about?
The funny thing is that I actually just heard his name in a conversation. Like somebody was talking and they said, "Oh, we went and met this Swami Gyanananda." And immediately I just looked at the person and said, "Stop. Like, I need to meet that person. Do you have contact information?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And so he gave me Swamiji's phone number. And then I called him and asked if I could come. And he gave me directions to his house. And he told me also kind of like how to get there. In India, it's not always so easy to get places. And so I came by bus, and it was a fairly long bus ride. And the conductor of the bus never took my money. And we finally got to where he lived in Dehradun. We finally got to Dehradun where he lived, and the guy that was taking the money got off the bus. And then the driver got off the bus. And then I chased down the driver and I said, "Hey, look, I never paid anything for this bus trip. I'd like to pay something." And no, 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 no. And he wouldn't take my money.
And why is that?
The most unusual thing. I never had it a single other time in India. I think why the bus driver wouldn't take it is that it's not his job. It's the ticket guy's job. And so
Okay.
he sort of didn't want to get involved, or thought, who knows. And then I went to go visit my teacher and I said, something really unusual happened on the way here, which is that I made it the entire way here without paying, and I'd come quite a distance. And he just looked at me and he said, "That's because you're meant to be here."
Hmm. I believe it. India is a fascinating place. I lived there not as long as you, just a couple of years in my case, and this was well before I began my yogic journey. Although even back
Oh
then
wow.
I was curious about it,
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, I keep meaning to go back at some point. But India is it's a beautiful country. It is at times a frustrating country.
definitely.
Yeah, and it's just so different from the West. That's the one thing that really stays with me is, and I don't mean on a physical gross level, but just in terms of the way people think, the way people perceive the world around them. Yeah, it was hard to put my finger on exactly what it was, but I just felt that it was so different from what I was accustomed to growing up, in my case in
Yeah,
Canada.
yeah, yeah. Beautiful.
So how long were you there?
In India for 12 years, and then
Yeah.
I've been back. I've been back several times since. I was running a meditation center in Kolkata for some years. That was really, really, really beautiful and really fun because Kolkata is entirely dedicated to Divine Mother. And there's almost no place in this world anymore that is completely and totally 100% dedicated to the Divine Mother. So that was quite fun.
Hmm.
And then I lived for a while outside of Delhi. I lived in Bangalore. I was kind of teaching all over India, all the way from the north, all the way to the south, and lots of spots in between. So quite fun.
And so I mean you grew up in the West in the United
Hmm.
States, correct?
Yep. Yep.
And so how did Indians react to a Westerner coming to their country and teaching them this practice that goes back, millennia
Yeah.
in
I
India?
mean,
What was
people,
the reaction
people,
like?
people often ask me, like, okay, you taught in India for so long. How many of your students were Indian? Like 99%.
Hmm.
Occasionally I had a Westerner, but the vast majority of people who studied with me were Indian. And what's kind of fun about it is that until I started teaching Westerners, I had no qualification at all to teach yoga. I didn't have any certificate. I didn't have any, Yoga Alliance, anything. I didn't have anything. But that's not how people in India would ever look for a teacher. Like they wouldn't care at all if you had 1,000 certificates. They come in the room, they read you energetically. If they feel like you can support them in their journey, they stay.
Hmm.
And we were very popular. We had successful centers all over India, and I think it's because partially you can say by grace, we were very genuine in our approach. And like if I look at my own life, I mean, Peter, probably the name Devdas. Das actually means servant, and Dev means divine. It means divine servant. And if I
Divine
look
servant.
back, yeah, if I look back in my life to when I was quite young, that was the thing that I wanted to do. It was like I wanted to be of service to people in some way. And that's really kind of in a weird way, almost the only thing that I've wanted in my life. And partially, I think, as a result of that sincerity, there was tremendous openness when I was teaching in India.
And so you were teaching, you said meditation primarily, or also pranayama, or
Meditation and pranayama, and occasionally some kind of like in certain traditions of pranayama, there's like preparatory asana that you would do before you come into pranayama practice. When you get into very advanced pranayama, in general, that then kind of like tips over into something called kriya. Kriyas are like very specific sets of practices that
right?
have been laid out, that you just follow the kind of standard, for lack of a better word. You just do the same practice every day, and just doing the same practice every day I think in the modern world of yoga, many people would be like, "Oh, that's boring." It's like, no, like you go deeper in that practice every single day. You
Right.
know, like Yogananda specifically said, go deeper in your practice every single day. Don't miss a day.
Hmm.
And I think most people, even when I first heard that, I was like, "That's impossible." Like, that's like some crazy thing that somebody made up. And then I started practicing every day the same thing for years and years and years. It is possible, and not only is it possible, it's facilitated strongly by doing the same practice because there isn't any variation in it. It's like you're doing what you did yesterday. But the inner experience of that is definitely going to be different day to day. And overall, it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Can we maybe talk about this word pranayama? Because for you and I,
Mhm.
it's obvious what we're talking about, and for
Yeah,
most people who are steeped in the world of yoga, it's obvious. But for any listeners who may not be familiar with that term, what exactly is pranayama?
beautiful question. So, prana is universal life force, and often it's translated as energy or breath. And that confuses people, but it's all has the same root system. And that's why it's in a weird way, even though those might not be perfect translations, they are sort of acceptable because the energy system in your body runs the breath system in your body. And so, and that's all run by universal life force. The life force that's flowing in an animal or a plant is not really in any different fundamentally different than what would be flowing inside of the human form. And so, you know, just thinking of it as universal life force. But what the yogis studied for a long time is what are the pathways of that life force, how to come into right relationship to that life force, how to purify and work with the forces of the body for vibrant health and energy and spiritual discovery. And that really is a science, actually. I think, in the West, people have this idea of like, oh, energy, it's kind of like a bit of a unexact thing. And it's like, no, 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 it's exactly exact. Like the yogis have every single pathway in the body, every energetic pathway in the body mapped out. And if you really begin to understand that, not as a concept, but as a functional reality in system, your system will come alive in a much different way. And, that's in a weird way, one of the great modern yogis said, you should keep your system in a constant state of overflow. If you sort of think, what does that mean? It's like your energy should just be absolutely overflowing constantly. Like, is that a possibility? Of course. Like, but it's not most people's reality because of what we were talking about earlier. It's like even the food that we eat doesn't have the same kind of prana that it used to have in it. So then we have to double down and get serious about our pranayama practice, get serious about our energy and our awareness and our relationship to the universal force of life.
So a lot of people tend to interpret or translate pranayama as breath work.
Right.
And as I'm sure you're aware, there's a modern breathwork movement in the West,
Yeah.
and there are some practitioners who have achieved quite a bit of fame, renown. Thinking of people
Sure.
like Wim Hof, for example, the
Yeah.
Iceman, who
Sure.
who many people may be familiar with. What are your thoughts on this modern breathwork movement? Is it the same as pranayama? Is it different? Is
I
it,
think it's It's a
Yeah.
beautiful question. I think it's a little different because the intention of it is a little bit different. And, you know, does the intention of your practice affect the outcome of your practice? Yeah, of course it does. Like that's obvious, you know. When I meet people who meditate, especially in the modern world, the first question I ask them is why? And they don't always know the answer.
Hmm.
You know, it's like I've been told that this is a good thing to do. It's like, okay, like that is going to be a very short engagement. Like, you know, you have to recognize the value of it inside of your experience directly and see the value of it inside the experience directly. Otherwise, you won't continue to practice it. But the aim of pranayama, I mean, one aim could be what we said before, which is getting your system into a state of energetic overflow, which is just to say that you have an abundant vitality and health and wellness. But that's not really the end result. The kind of end game in yoga is knowing all of the different aspects of who we are. And that is the physical, which there's nothing wrong with that side. That's actually a very beautiful side. The energetic, the lower mind, the higher mind, and then the last one, the yogis sometimes just call Satchitananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, which in my estimation is kind of another word of what people in the West would use for soul. Basically, it's like the invisible side of you that's nevertheless present, and not just present, it's the physical presence wouldn't be possible without the subtle being there first. You know, because we live in a material world, we tend to think that the material is more important and the subtle less important. Rudolf Steiner, who kind of started Waldorf schools, he said the physical reality is the footprint of the divine. And that's a fairly accurate description. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the footprint. Like that's also part of the beauty. That's also part of the power and the joy of the experience. But it's not the most subtle of the experiences inside of us that are going on right now. Like choicelessly, you know, if you didn't have an energy body, your physical body would no longer function. So you have these bodies, you have these other parts of who you are, but in most people, those are either unexplored mostly or unexplored completely. And the intention behind the yogic science is understanding all of those different levels. Like from what I've seen in some modern breath work, I feel like it's more tied into psychology, which certainly has its place, but I feel like if you go to breath work and you go to psychology, that is not necessarily going to reveal to you all of the aspects of who you are.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that, in my brief yogic journey, you have been one of my teachers, and specifically in the area of pranayama,
Hmm.
and we have practiced together. Well, I mean, some of the sessions were were recordings, but we've
Yeah,
spent so much time talking
yeah,
together,
def-
and I so value all of your insights. Yeah, pranayama is so I did start my journey with, quote unquote breath work with Wim Hof
okay.
some years back, as it was recommended to me at the time by someone that I knew and respected very much. And so I tried it out, and I thought it was fascinating. It was unlike anything I had ever done before. And there was something going on inside of me. I couldn't explain what it was, but I definitely felt something.
Yeah.
And so I, continued with that practice for some time before eventually stumbling into yoga. And and the pranayama path. And from my perspective, there were certainly some similarities, but I would tend to agree with you that, when you mentioned intentionality and the importance of that, that is something that I find that is such a powerful practice, intention setting,
Yeah,
and really affects the outcome of whatever you're doing,
definitely.
including yoga. So yeah, all of that to say that, while I still, from time to time do practice Wim Hof and other methods that I've learned on the non-yogic path, there is something about, all of the different lessons that I learned from you in particular, something about those practices that just invites a sense of awe is the only way I
Yeah.
can express it.
Peter, you hit exactly in the right spot. It's like if yoga just brings you into awe and wonder over the tremendousness of life, what a gift.
Hmm. So before we started recording this evening, I was just looking for some insightful wisdom, ancient wisdom. As I think I like to read old, sacred texts from different
Yeah,
traditions. I'm not
yeah.
dogmatic whatsoever. I was raised in the Christian tradition, but I've read the Hindu sacred texts. I've read the Buddhist sacred texts, and many others, because I just find them so fascinating. And the overlap between all of them, like, to me, it really seems like it's the same message,
Yes,
maybe dressed up a little bit differently, but
of
there's
course.
so many similarities. Anyhow, as I was searching through some different texts, I came across this, which I thought was really interesting and pertinent for people on any kind of spiritual path or contemplating engaging upon such a
Hmm.
path. So this is from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas.
Beautiful.
And for anyone who isn't aware, any listeners, so in the Christian Bible, there are 4 Gospels which tell the life of Jesus Christ. But there are several other accounts of the life of Christ that were left out of the Bible, and one of them is the Gospel of Thomas. So, anyhow, this is the quote: "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you."
Wow.
What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Very strong. It reminds me of something that my teacher in India said that he read in the newspaper. What he said he read in the newspaper was, everyone is born original, but most people die as copies.
Hmm.
It's like there
That
is something totally original about every human being. And yet, not everybody gets to the point at which they're singing the song of their soul.
Are you familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell, The Hero with a Thousand? What is it called? The
A
Hero
little
with a
bit.
Thousand Faces, I think
Yes,
is the title of
yes.
it. Because it kind of that's what I'm reminded of as you say that. The basic theme of this work being that, and it's a work on ancient myths, and the thread that ties together pretty much all ancient myths, and it's the hero's journey.
Right.
And it's this idea that that this is essentially what life is, that this is our chance to live out our own hero's journey. And so yeah, just coming back to this quote, bringing forth what is within you, which kind of implies, well, what does that mean? Living an authentic life, living with integrity, I suppose. And then the opposite, if you don't bring forth what's within you, then, what does that mean? Are you therefore living a life full of regret? And what are the implications of that?
Yeah,
It's a lot to chew on, isn't it?
yeah, it's. I mean, one thing that I've been reflecting on recently, which is maybe a little bit strange, but many yogis, and probably I know Peter's a great yogi also. So probably you have something similar. It's like we're just used to things happening really fast. Like if you
Right.
want something, it just happens. Like you don't have to think about it, you don't have to talk about it, it just happens. And something I've really been appreciating in the kind of physical side of life is the fact that everything's not instantaneous. Like you can learn something, you can expand, you can become aware of things that you weren't aware of before. And that journey of, discovery, either outwardly or inwardly, it's just so intensely beautiful. And, my own teacher said about originality, the word, people think originality means that you do something that nothing's ever done, nobody's ever done before. He said originality doesn't mean that. It means it comes from your origin. It's originality.
Interesting.
And my feeling is, like, even when we were talking before about different spiritual paths, I've worked with many, many, many thousands of people over the years from all kinds of different spiritual paths. And observing them, I think people have this idea like, oh, it's so important. What is my path? Which techniques do I use? How, am I meditating? Am I doing pranayama? Am I singing? What's my practice like? The characteristic unquestionably that is the most important for any spiritual person from any spiritual path is that you're sincere. Because if you don't want to know, guess what? Like, you won't know. If you say, okay, I'm happy in the dream and I just want to live the dream, you'll go on dreaming. Like the minute that you say, no, I really want to know. Like I really want to know what's happening in this world. I really want to know myself from the inside out. The pathway to discovery is already opening. Like the minute that sincerity is there, the universe itself will reaccommodate that possibility.
What you are seeking is also seeking you. I don't recall who said it. I might have heard that from you, actually. I might have heard that from you.
Yeah. Very beautiful.
That sounds like something Devdas would say.
It sure does.
It sure does. It sure does. What you are seeking is also seeking you.
Yeah.
Wow, look at the time. I have so many more questions, so many more threads I would love to explore, but we're coming to the end of our discussion here. Maybe I'll leave you with one more thought to chew on, because I found this one also really, really interesting for anyone on the spiritual path, on the yogic path. This is again from Lao Tzu, the ancient Chinese sage and founder of Taoism.
Mm-hmm.
To become learned, each day add something. To become enlightened, each day drop something. What does Devdas think about that?
I love it. Absolutely. It's the hardest thing to get across to people. I used to say to everybody, you come to yoga and you think you're learning something, but what I'm actually trying to do is help you unlearn. But what's fun in the end is that both are possible. And it's like when you talk about subtle things and energy and the realms of the heavens, one of the great modern yogis said, in looking for heaven, we've made this world into hell. And there is some truth to that. And that's because we think oftentimes that subtle is better. And subtle is not necessarily better, it's all one thing. Like you could say the footprint of the divine is the physical. But is your foot less important than your hand? It's all one experience. That's the sort of side of what we would think of in yoga as being embodied. And people sort of take that to mean the wrong thing. It's like I'm embodied in my practice. What it means is you're reflecting all of the different levels of who and what you are. And the song of your soul and the song of your life and the song of your physical body and the song of your energy body are all one song.
That is a wonderful thought to end our conversation. Devdas, thank you so much for chatting with me on this first episode of our podcast. I truly value all of your insights, all of your wisdom. This has been a truly enlightening discussion for me, and thank you again. If listeners want to find out more about yourself, about Sahaja Collective, where do they go? What do they do?
Peter, first let me just say it's been such a privilege and such a joy. So thank you so much for having me. I hope we get another chance sometime. It's just really been a tremendous pleasure. And we have, if you're new to yoga and you're interested in the breath, we have a free breath course on what's called Sahaja Portal. That's also where the book Excerpts from Infinity is for free. That is Sahaja, Sahaja, collective.org. And if you're more interested in retreats and things like that, that's our website, Sahaja Collective again, but .org, not .com. So com is the portal and org is the website. And of course, we're on Instagram and all of the other magical places. And yeah, please feel free to reach out and connect if you're interested.
Well, thank you again, Devdas. It's been such a wonderful conversation. Too short. We'll have to do it again at some point in the future because I've got like a thousand other questions I wanted to ask you that I didn't have time to get to. Thank you, Devdas, so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.